The garden smelled of roses first. Always roses. The old-fashioned kind with petals thick as velvet, and a sweetness that sat heavy on the tongue if you breathed too deeply. Not the sharp modern hybrids people grew now. These were the Thornfield roses, planted when the house was new, fed on bone meal and secrets for more than a century. Iris Vane stood at the wrought iron gate, one gloved hand resting on the latch she hadn't quite lifted yet, letting the scent find her. It came in layers. Under the roses lay damp earth, turned that morning by Jasper Wren's spade. Then the faint almond warmth of heliotrope from the border beds, and something greener, crushed box leaves perhaps, or the bruised stems of sweet peas that ladies would pin to their hats later. A tea drifted across from the long white tables set under the lime trees. Darjeeling mostly, with a thread of bergamot and the milky ghost of poured cream. Perfume too, of course. Lavender water, rosatar, a daring splash of tuberose from the younger women who wanted to be noticed. All of it mixing, overlapping, until the air felt almost drinkable. She should go in. Her cigarette case was already in her palm. Turkish, the ones she kept for occasions when ordinary calm wouldn't do. She didn't light one. Not yet. The smoke would only announce her before she was ready to be announced. The party had already begun in earnest. Laughter floated over the hedge in small, careful bursts, the kind people make when they know someone important might be listening. Parasols opened and closed like slow white flowers, ushered a string quartet. 4 elderly gentlemen who came every year from Salisbury played something light and Viennese, the cello line slightly behind the others, as though the player had forgotten his glasses again. Iris could hear the small scrape of the bow changing direction, the tiny apology in the next note. She lifted the latch at last. Gravel crunched under her boots, not loud but deliberate. Heads turned, not all at once, but in the slow ripple that happens when someone arrives who doesn't quite fit the expected pattern. Iris wore dove grey, simple enough to pass for mourning if anyone cared to misread it, severe enough to remind them she had once stood in places where lace tore on barbed wire. Her hat was small, unadorned, no ribbons, no flowers, and she had considered pinning a single bloom behind the ribbon band that morning, something ironic perhaps, but decided against it. Irony required energy she didn't have today. Lady Cornelia Thornfield stood near the central fountain, surrounded as always. She wore lilac silk, the exact shade of the wisteria that still dripped from the pergola behind her, even though its proper season had passed weeks ago. Her hat was enormous, a garden in itself. Pale peonies, ivory ranunculus, sprigs of myrtle. The flowers looked freshly cut. A single drop of water still clung to one petal and caught the light. Iris noticed it the way she noticed small things that didn't belong, because they always did belong, eventually. Oliver Thornfield hovered at his mother's elbow too close, laughing too often. His fiancée, Penelope Cross, stood a careful step behind him, with smiling the smile of someone who has been told exactly how wide to make it. Beatrice Holt, Lady Cornelia's oldest friend, held a teacup she hadn't sipped from in 10 minutes. The porcelain had gone from steaming to merely warm against her fingers. Dr. Edmund Sorrel lingered near the tea urn, pretending interest in the silver samovar, while his eyes kept returning to Lady Cornelia's face. Countess Ada Merritt was not present, at least not yet, but her absence felt present, the way a missing tooth makes the tongue return again and again. And Jasper Wren. He moved through the edges of the party like weather. Wheelbarrow emptied now, secateurs tucked into the leather belt at his waist, hands still faintly green from sap. He paused near the rose arbour to deadhead a spent bloom, fingers quick and sure. The snip carried across the lawn, as small and final. Iris watched him do it twice more, before she realised she was staring. Lady Cornelia lifted her glass, champagne, not tea, and tapped it once with a fingernail. The sound cut through the quartet's last chord like a dropped pin. "My dear friends," she began. Her voice was lower than one expected from so small a woman. Warm, practiced, the kind of warmth that has been rehearsed in mirrors. She spoke of spring, of renewal, of the garden that had outlived so many seasons and so many thornfields. Polite murmurs answered her. Someone sighed with pleasure. Someone else coughed behind a glove. Iris felt the shift before she saw it. A faint new smell, sharp, almost chemical, sliding under the roses like a knife under silk. Almond? Yes, but not the comforting almond of heliotrope. This was bitterer, greener, wrong. It came from the direction of the east border, where the oldest rose arbour stood, the one no one ever sat beneath, because the thorns caught at skirts and sleeves. Lady Cornelia was still speaking. "And today I intend to make an announcement that will—" She stopped, not dramatically, not with a gasp, simply stopped, the way a clock stops when the spring runs down. Her glass tilted, champagne spilled in a thin gold arc and soaked into the grass without a sound. The glass itself slipped from her fingers, turned once in the air and landed upright, an absurd small miracle, before tipping sideways into the flower bed. She fell more slowly than gravity should allow. Face down among the hybrid teas, arms outstretched as though reaching for something just beyond the petals. A garland of white flowers, small, star-shaped, had been looped around her throat, not tied, draped, almost tenderly. Her lips were parted. She was smiling. The quartet played one more bar, before the first violinist realized no one was listening anymore. Silence arrived, thick and smelling of crushed roses. Iris moved before anyone else did, not running, walking quick level steps that carried her past frozen parasols and half-raised teacups. She knelt beside the body without touching it. The wrong smell was stronger here. White oleander. Not from this garden. Thornfield had no oleander. Lady Cornelia had always said it was too common, too poisonous for a garden meant to delight. Iris bent closer. The flowers around the neck were indeed oleander. 5 small clusters, stems still damp where they'd been stripped of leaves, as a few white petals had already begun to brown at the edges. Underneath the perfume of the party, the plant's sap gave off its faint bitter almond reek, the one that promised heart-stopping quiet if enough found its way inside. In Lady Cornelia's right hand, a folded piece of paper, half crumpled, the ink still wet where rain or tears had touched it. Iris did not take it. Not yet. She looked up. Guests had formed a loose circle, careful not to step on the grass borders. Oliver's face had gone the colour of old parchment. Penelope's hand was at her throat, pressing as though to keep something inside. Beatrice's teacup finally tilted. Tea ran down her wrist and dripped onto her shoe without her seeming to notice. Dr. Sorrel had taken one step forward, then stopped, as though medical instinct and something older were fighting in him. Jasper Wren stood apart, secateurs still in his hand, the metal catching a last flash of sun before the clouds rolled in. Thunder murmured somewhere beyond the downs. The storm was coming faster than anyone had expected. Iris straightened. "This gate will be locked," she said, not loudly, but clearly enough that every person heard. "Until the police arrive, no one leaves." No one argued. The first heavy drop struck the brim of her hat, then another, then a dozen more. The smell of wet earth rose to meet the roses, the tea, the poison. And underneath it all, still, the faint, unmistakable almond breath of oleander. Iris felt her own pulse in her throat, steady but quicker than it should have been. She had smelled death before. This one smelled different, planned, personal, and already beginning to fade under the rain. The rain came properly then, not in sheets but in slow, deliberate drops that struck leaves first, then gravel, then skin. Each one carried the smell of the sky, cool iron, distant lightning, the faint metallic promise of more to come. It mingled with the roses so that the sweetness turned almost cloying, like sugar left too long in the damp. Iris stayed where she was, kneeling beside Lady Cornelia, while the others retreated under the nearest pergola or the wide canvas awning over the tea tables. No one ran, no one screamed. Politeness held them in place the way good breeding holds a horse at a jump it knows will hurt. She reached for the half letter without moving the body. The paper was heavy rag, the kind still made in small mills near Bath, cream-coloured, deckle-edged. Ink had run in thin blue veins where rain had touched it. But enough remained legible. You did in 1972. I have never forgotten. Today is your last spring. The words stopped there, torn clean across. The other half was missing. Iris folded it once, slipped it inside her cuff, where the damp wouldn't reach it so quickly. Her fingers smelled of ink and wet paper now, under the oleander. She stood. The circle of guests had tightened without seeming to move. Oliver Thornfield's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before he managed mother. It came out small, almost a child's question. Penelope Cross put a hand on his arm. He shook it off without looking at her. Beatrice Holt had set her teacup down somewhere. On the grass, on a chair, Iris couldn't see. And now her hands hung empty at her sides. She stared at the body as though waiting for it to correct itself, and to rise and apologize for the interruption. Dr. Sorrell finally stepped forward. He knelt opposite Iris, careful not to let his trousers touch the wet earth. He felt for a pulse at the wrist, then at the neck beneath the garland. His fingers came away clean, no blood, only the faint sticky residue of sap. He shook his head once, small, professional. Dead, he said, some minutes already. Heart, I should think. No one asked how he knew. They all knew he knew. Iris looked at the oleander again. 5 small sprays, artfully arranged. Someone had taken time over them. Not haste, not rage, care. She rose and walked toward the tea tables, not fast, not slow. The rain had darkened the white cloths. Cups sat abandoned, saucers filling like tiny lakes. She passed Jasper Wren where he stood under the overhang of the greenhouse door, and he hadn't moved since the fall. His secateurs were still open in his right hand, one blade catching a drop that slid down the curve and fell. She stopped in front of him. "Jasper," she said. He looked at her. Eyes the colour of wet slate. No surprise in them. No fear either, just waiting. "This morning," she said. "What did you cut?" He blinked once. "Roses," he answered. "The hybrid teas along the South Walk. Lady asked for fresh ones for the tables." Iris nodded. "Your gloves," she said. He lifted his hands as though noticing them for the first time. The leather was old, cracked at the seams, stained dark with years of soil and sap. But across the palms and fingers, faint white streaks, not dirt, not green from stems. "White," she said. "From what?" He closed the secateurs with a small click. "Must be chalk," he said. From the potting shed, marking canes." She waited. He waited longer. The rain drummed on the glass roof above them, steady now, like fingers tapping a table. Iris turned away first. She walked the length of the long table, past scones going soft, past jam pots weeping red onto linen. At the far end, near the samovar, she found what she was looking for. A small pile of ash, still grey and delicate under the rain's first touch. Someone had burned paper here, quickly. The wind had scattered most of it, but a corner remained, curled and black at the edges. She crouched. One word legible in the ash, faint but clear before the drops could blur it further. Jasper. She didn't touch it, just looked. Then she straightened and looked back toward the rose arbor. The body lay where it had fallen, face down among the blooms. Rain had begun to darken the lilac silk at the shoulders. The oleander garland looked almost bridal now, pale against the deepening green. Iris felt the first real chill, not from the weather. She had seen murders before, quick ones in alleyways, slow ones in hospital beds, deliberate ones in places where no one was supposed to look. This was different. This one had been dressed, arranged, as though the killer wanted the death to be beautiful. Or perhaps as though the killer had loved the garden enough to make the death belong to it. She walked back toward the group under the pergola. Oliver was sitting now, on a wrought iron chair that hadn't been meant for sitting. His head was in his hands. Penelope stood beside him, not touching, just present. Beatrice had found another teacup, someone's abandoned one, and held it between both palms as though warming herself at a fire. Iris stopped in front of Beatrice. "Beatrice," she said quietly. The older woman looked up, eyes red-rimmed but dry. She had not cried yet. "Did she tell you?" Iris asked. Beatrice's lips parted, closed again. "About today," Iris said, "about what she meant to say." Beatrice looked past her toward the body. "She was going to speak," she said at last, "after the toast about changes to the estate, to the family." Iris waited. Beatrice's voice dropped lower. "She wanted it to be right," she said, "after all these years." Iris felt the word before she heard it. She didn't say it aloud. Instead, she asked, "Who else knew?" Beatrice shook her head. "No one," she said, "not even Oliver." She wanted to tell them all at once, cleanly. Iris looked toward Jasper again. He had moved, only a step or two, closer to the greenhouse door. His back was to them now. He was looking at nothing, or perhaps at the rain running down the glass in slow rivers. The storm was settling in. Thunder came closer, low and patient. Iris touched the folded paper in her cuff. She would read the rest later. For now, she walked once more to the body. Kneeling again, she lifted one small oleander cluster, careful, using only the tips of her fingers, and brought it close. The smell was unmistakable now that the rain had washed away some of the competing sweetness. Bitter almond, green, a faint metallic undernote, like pennies held too long in the palm. Poison, but not crude poison. This had been placed where it would be noticed, where it would be touched. It perhaps even brushed against lips in a final, absent gesture. Lady Cornelia had smiled as she fell. Iris set the cluster down exactly where it had been. She stood. The rain was heavier now, drumming the canvas, soaking through her shoulders. She looked at each of them in turn. Oliver, Penelope, Beatrice, Sorel, and last of all Jasper, who still had not turned. One of them had carried these flowers here. One of them had looped them around the neck of the woman who had shaped this garden, this family, this silence. And one of them had burned the other half of the letter. Iris felt her pulse again, steady but no longer calm. The afternoon was not over. Neither was the smell of oleander. It clung to her gloves now, faint but stubborn, the way certain scents stay long after the flower has withered. The rain had found its rhythm now. They're steady enough to blur the edges of everything. It tapped on leaves, on canvas, on the glasshouse panes behind Jasper Wren. Each drop a small insistence that time was still moving, even if no one wanted it to. The garden smelled heavier, wet soil rising first, then the bruised roses releasing their last sweetness before it turned sour, and underneath, stubborn as ever, that faint, bitter almond ghost. Iris walked the perimeter path alone for a while, not to escape the others. They were all still huddled under shelter, voices low and careful, but to let the smells settle in her mind. She had learned long ago, in places where the air carried cordite and diesel and worse, that scents told truths words never quite managed. A room could lie, a face could lie, but the air remembered. She passed the old sundial, its bronze gnomon green with verdigris, rain sliding down the numerals in slow silver line that the stone base was mossy. She brushed it with her fingertips and brought the damp green to her nose. Clean, earthy, nothing hidden there. Further on, the greenhouse door stood ajar. Jasper had gone inside sometime in the last half hour. She could see his silhouette through the fogged glass, bent over a bench, hands moving slowly. She pushed the door wider. Warmth met her first, the trapped humidity of peat and growing things, then the sharper smell of cut stems left too long in water. Jasper didn't look up. He was stripping leaves from a handful of ordinary garden roses, reds mostly, the kind Lady Cornelia had always preferred for the house vases. His movements were deliberate, almost tender. Thumb and forefinger, pinch and pull. The leaves fell into a tin bucket with small dry sounds. Until Iris stepped inside. The door swung shut behind her on its own weight. "Jasper," she said again. This time he paused. "You've been asking questions," he said, not accusing, just stating. "I have." He set the roses down, wiped his hands on the front of his apron. Old canvas, patched in 3 places with darker thread. The white streaks on his gloves were gone now, or perhaps washed away by rain. Hard to tell. "The oleander," she said. "It didn't grow here." "No," he answered, "it didn't. Where did it come from?" He looked at her then. Really looked. Eyes steady, the colour of rain on slate. "Someone brought it," he said. "In a pocket, maybe, or wrapped in a handkerchief, small enough bunch." Iris waited. He picked up a length of twine from the bench, began to coil it slowly around his fingers. "I've worked this garden 23 years come September," he said. "I know every inch, every root, every thorn. Lady Cornelia, she liked things tidy. No surprises in the beds, no strays. Oleander was never allowed. Too dangerous, she said, too common." His voice stayed even, almost gentle. Iris leaned against the potting bench. The wood was warm under her palms, smelling faintly of linseed oil and old soil. "The letter," she said. He didn't flinch. "Half of it was in her hand," she went on. "The other half burned at the tea table. Your name in the ash." Jasper exhaled once, a small sound. "People burn things when they're afraid," he said, "or when they're angry." He nodded, as though conceding a point. "Or when they're angry." Silence stretched between them. Rain drummed the roof like distant artillery. Iris felt the old habit rise. Count the beats, measure the intervals, wait for the next shell. She pushed it down. 1972, she said quietly. Jasper's hands stilled on the twine. He didn't speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was softer than before. My sister, he said. Ellen, she was 8. Iris felt the air change inside the greenhouse. Thicker, warmer, as though the plants themselves were listening. She wandered off during the May fete, he went on. Lady Cornelia was hosting, same as always. Everyone laughing, everyone drinking. Ellen liked the roses, always did. She went to pick one, only one, she said later, and got lost in the far beds. The ones behind the old yew hedge. He paused. She was gone 3 hours before anyone looked properly. By then it was dusk. They found her under the beech tree, curled up like she was sleeping. But she wasn't. Iris said nothing. Official word was accident, Jasper continued. Heat, exhaustion, a child alone too long. But Lady Cornelia knew different. She'd seen Ellen earlier, spoke to her even, told her to stay near the party. Ellen didn't listen. Children don't always. He looked down at his hands. Lady never spoke of it again. Not once. Not to me. Not to anyone. But she kept me on. Year after year. Gave me the cottage, the work, the roses, as though keeping me close was the same as making it right. Iris felt the folded paper in her cuff, like a small weight. She was going to speak today, she said. Jasper nodded once. I knew. You knew what she meant to say? I guessed. He set the twine down. She'd been different these last months. Quieter. Writing more letters. Burning them sometimes. And I found ashes in the grate more than once. My name on one scrap. Just once. Iris breathed in. Peat roses. Rain through the open ventilator slats. You waited 23 years, she said. I gardened 23 years, he corrected. There's a difference. He looked at her then, directly. I didn't bring the oleander. Iris studied his face. No tremor in the mouth, no quick blink, just steady. Then who did? Jasper shook his head. That's yours to find, he said. I only know what I know. He turned back to the bench, picked up the stripped roses again, began tying them into a small bundle with fresh twine. Knots, small and tight and perfect. Iris watched him work. The greenhouse smelled of life. Green, damp, insistent. But underneath it still, the faintest trace of oleander clung to her clothes. To his apron, perhaps, and to the air between them. She stepped toward the door. Jasper, she said. He didn't turn. If she was going to confess, Iris said, and give you what was owed, why burn the letter? Why not let her finish? He tied the last knot, set the bundle down. Because some things, he said, are better left unfinished. The rain eased for a moment, then returned harder. Iris pushed the door open. Outside, the light had gone grey-green, the colour of old glass. The party guests had drifted closer together under the pergola, small knots of black and pastel, voices hushed. Beatrice Holt stood a little apart, arms folded tight across her chest. When she saw Iris emerge from the greenhouse, she started forward, then stopped. Iris crossed the sodden lawn toward her. Beatrice met her halfway. She was going to make it right, Beatrice said without preamble. Her voice cracked once, small. Iris nodded. About Ellen. Beatrice's eyes widened, then filled. You know. I know enough. Beatrice looked toward the rose arbor. The body had been covered now. Someone's shawl, pale blue, already darkening with rain. She carried it all of these years, Beatrice whispered. Every spring she planted more roses, as though they could cover it, as though beauty could bury guilt. Iris felt something shift inside her chest. Not pity exactly. Recognition, perhaps. And today she meant to speak it aloud. Beatrice nodded. To Oliver, to the family, to Jasper, to everyone. Iris looked back toward the greenhouse. Jasper was still inside, visible through the glass, head bent over his work. She never got the chance, Iris said. Beatrice's hands tightened on her arms. No, she said. She didn't. Thunder rolled closer. Low, patient, inevitable. Iris felt the first real weariness then. Not in her legs. In the place behind her eyes where she used to keep the war smells separate from the everyday ones. She looked at Beatrice. Who else knew? She asked again. Beatrice hesitated. Only me, she said, and perhaps one other. She didn't name the other. She didn't need to. The rain kept falling. The garden kept breathing. And the smell of oleander lingered, faint now, but refusing to wash away. The storm had passed its peak by the time the first police motor car appeared at the gates. 2 constables in dripping capes, followed by an inspector who looked as though he had been pulled from tea and was already regretting it. The rain had eased to a fine mist that hung in the air like smoke, returning every leaf and petal silver-edged. The garden smelled cleansed now, almost too clean. Wet stone, sodden grass, the faint lingering sweetness of dying roses. Even the oleander had faded to a whisper, though Iris could still taste its bitterness at the back of her throat when she swallowed. She met the inspector at the entrance to the rose arbor. He was middle-aged, moustache neatly trimmed, eyes tired but sharp. He looked at the covered shape under the blue shawl, then at Iris. Miss Vane, he said, not a question. She nodded once. He lifted the shawl carefully. Lady Cornelia's face was peaceful still, the smile fixed now in the way death sometimes fixes expressions that were never meant to last. The oleander garland had slipped slightly. One spray lay across her cheek like an afterthought. The inspector replaced the shawl. How poison, you think? Oleander, Iris said. White, not from this garden. He made a small sound in his throat, acknowledgement, not surprise. They walked together toward the pergola, where the others waited. No one had left, and no one had tried. The storm had seen to that, and perhaps something heavier. Jasper Wren stood apart again, near the greenhouse door. His apron was soaked through, clinging to his shirt. He had rolled his sleeves. The skin of his forearms was marked with old scars. Thorn scratches, years of them, faded to thin white lines. The inspector spoke to the group quietly at first, names, times, what each had seen. Answers came in fragments. I was pouring tea. I heard the glass break. She just fell. Oliver answered in monosyllables, voice cracked. Penelope kept her eyes on the ground. Beatrice spoke last, a voice steady but thin. She was going to make an announcement, Beatrice said, about the past, about a child, long ago. The inspector's pen paused. Jasper looked up then. The inspector turned to him. Mr. Wren. Jasper stepped forward. Gravel crunched under his boots. I did it, he said, simple, quiet, no drama. The inspector didn't react at once, just looked. How? Jasper lifted his hands, palms up. The oleander. I brought it. Looped it round her neck while she was speaking. She didn't struggle, she smiled, as though she understood. A small sound from Oliver, half sob, half disbelief. Why? The inspector asked. Jasper looked past him, toward the rose beds. My sister, he said, Ellen, 1972. She died here, in this garden, because Lady Cornelia left her alone. Told her to stay close, then forgot, or chose not to look. I waited. 23 years. I gardened. I waited for her to speak the truth. Today she was going to. I couldn't let her. The truth would have come out, and Ellen would still be gone. He paused. I wanted the secret to die with her. The inspector wrote something slowly. Iris watched Jasper's face. No tears, no trembling. Just the same steady patience he used when tying a rose to a cane. She stepped forward. There's more, she said. The inspector looked at her. "The letter," Iris continued, "half in her hand, half burned." But Beatrice knew what the announcement was to be. Beatrice lifted her head. "She was going to confess," Beatrice said, "publicly. To Oliver, to the family, to Jasper. And she was going to leave the estate to Jasper in reparation. Not all of it. Enough to make it right. Or as right as it could be." Jasper's face changed then. Not dramatically. A small cracking, like ice under weight. He looked at Beatrice. "She was going to give it to me?" Beatrice nodded. "She told me last week, in the drawing room, over tea. She said she couldn't carry it any more. That spring had come too many times without confession." Jasper closed his eyes. For a moment, the garden was silent, except for the drip of water from leaves. Then he opened them again. "I killed her," he said, "an hour before she meant to forgive me." The inspector made another note. Iris felt something settle in her chest, cold, heavy final. She walked away from the group, back toward the rose arbor. The mist had thickened, shapes blurred at the edges. She knelt once more beside the body, lifted the shawl just enough. Our Lady Cornelia's hand still held the crumpled half-letter. Iris took it gently, unfolded it beside the one from her cuff. The torn edges matched perfectly. The full sentence read, "You did in 1972. I have never forgotten. Today is your last spring, but it will also be mine. I will speak, and then I will rest." Iris folded both halves together, placed them in Lady Cornelia's hand, closed the fingers over them. She stood. The inspector was leading Jasper away now, quietly, without cuffs. Jasper walked without resistance, head up, looking once at the roses as though saying goodbye. Iris stayed. The others drifted toward the house, Oliver supported between Penelope and Beatrice, Dr. Sorrel following at a distance, voices low, footsteps soft on wet gravel. Iris remained alone in the garden. The mist smelled of clean earth now, as of green things breathing after rain. The roses hung heavy-headed, petals dropping one by one into puddles. Somewhere, a blackbird began to sing, tentative, then sure. She walked to the border bed where the oleander spray had first been noticed. One small cluster remained, half buried in mud. She crouched, lifted it with careful fingers. The smell was faint, almost gone. She dug a small hole with her heel, deep enough for the roots that weren't there, placed the cluster inside, covered it with soil, pressed it down. Not a grave, just a planting. She stood. The light was failing, grey turning to indigo at the edges of the sky. Iris brushed soil from her gloves. Spring would come again next year. The roses would bloom. The garden would smell of sweetness and damp earth, and perhaps somewhere beneath it all, a faint echo of almond. But some wounds stayed. They didn't heal with seasons. They simply waited, quiet, patient, like a gardener, waiting for the right moment to speak. Iris turned toward the house. The lamps were being lit inside, one by one, small warm squares against the dusk. She walked slowly. No hurry now. The story was finished. The garden kept its silence. And the flowers, as always, would open again in the spring, but some scars the sun would never reach. The story ended where it was meant to end, with the garden quiet under dusk, the lamps lit in the house windows, and the rain finally stopped. There was no part 5 waiting in the outline we followed. The resolution closed the circle as the mist settled, and the blackbird sang its last notes. But sometimes, when the words are finished, the air still holds something. A breath, a scent that doesn't quite leave. If you're asking for more because the silence after the last line feels too complete, or because you want to linger a little longer in the garden after everyone else has gone inside, I can give you that. Not as a new chapter with plot and suspects and revelations. Those have already found their places. But as an epilogue in the same slow, breathing style. A few extra minutes of voiceover, if that's what you need. Here it is then. Call it the afterbreath, the part that happens when the story thinks it's over. The house lights stayed on late that night. Not bright, just enough to push back the dark from the windows that looked out over the east lawn. Iris stood on the terrace steps for a while, coat unbuttoned, collar turned up against the cooling air. The gravel path below her still glistened. Small puddles caught fragments of lamplight and held them like spilled coins. She didn't go in. Instead, she walked once more to the rose arbour. The blue shawl had been taken away with the body. Only flattened grass remained. A darker oval in the silvered lawn. She knelt there, not to pray, not exactly, just to be close to where the smell had been strongest. The earth was soft under her fingers, cold now. She pressed her palm flat and felt the faint warmth still trapped beneath the surface, the way soil remembers the day even after the sun has gone. No oleander scent lingered here any more. The rain had done its work. Only roses, damp and bruised, and the clean mineral breath of wet stone. She thought of Jasper in the back of the police motor car, head turned toward the window, watching the garden slip away behind him, as she thought of the moment his face had cracked when Beatrice spoke of the bequest. Not joy, not relief, something quieter. The look of a man who had spent decades preparing for one kind of ending and was handed another. She thought of Lady Cornelia's smile, fixed now, final, a smile that might have meant forgiveness, or understanding, or simply the relief of no longer having to carry the weight alone. Iris stood. Her boots left small prints in the soft grass. She didn't try to erase them. Back at the terrace, she paused again. From inside came the low murmur of voices, Oliver's, broken, Beatrice's steadying him, Penelope's, softer than before. Dr. Sorrel had already left, driven away in his own car before the inspector finished his notes. The quartet's instruments were packed, the tea tables cleared. The garden party had become something else entirely, and no one quite knew what to call it yet. Iris reached into her pocket. The Turkish cigarette case was still there, cool against her palm. She took one out, rolled it between her fingers. Didn't light it. The night smelled different now. No more competing perfumes, no tea, no champagne. Just the garden after rain. Earth, green stems, the faint rot beginning at the edges of fallen petals. Honest, unadorned. She put the cigarette back, turned, walked down the steps and along the south path, past the lime trees, past the sundial, whose gnomon pointed nowhere useful in the dark. She didn't hurry. There was nowhere left to hurry to. At the gate, she stopped. The wrought iron latch felt colder than before. She lifted it slowly. The hinges gave their small, familiar creak. Beyond the gate, the lane stretched dark toward the downs. No lights there. Only the shape of hills against a sky that had finally cleared enough to show a few stars. Iris stepped through, closed the gate behind her. The click of the latch was small, definite. She stood a moment longer on the other side, looking back. The house glowed softly. The garden lay quiet between her and the windows. Somewhere in there, someone would be making tea again, weak perhaps, because hands were unsteady. Someone would be speaking in low tones about tomorrow, about arrangements, about what came next. Iris turned away. The lane smelled of wet hawthorn and distant wood smoke. She walked, not fast, not slow, just walking. Behind her the garden waited for morning, for the sun to find the roses again, and for new buds to push through the places where old ones had fallen. And somewhere beneath the soil, in the small hole she had made with her heel, one oleander cluster lay buried, not growing, not spreading, just resting. Poisoned ground remembers too, but spring would come anyway. The flowers would open, the scents would rise, and the wounds, the quiet, patient ones, would stay exactly where they were, waiting for no season to heal them, only for someone to walk past and notice the shape they left in the grass. Iris kept walking. The stars came out one by one. Somewhere far off, a nightingale began. She didn't look back again. There was no need. The story had ended, and the garden, being a garden, simply carried on. If this feels like enough, we can let it rest here. If you want something different, a different tone, a shift in focus, a more of someone else's thoughts, or even a small coda from years later, tell me. Otherwise, the gate is closed, the latch has clicked, and the night air is clean.